Welcome to the Elevate Your Equity podcast, where we, as married busy professionals, leverage real estate investing to unlock the 3+1 degrees of freedom: health, location, time, and financial. And now, here's your host, Derek Clifford.
Today, we've got a very special guest on the show, Mr. Darshan Soni. Mr. Darshan is my property manager for many properties in Indianapolis right now, and he's doing an awesome job. I'm obviously very happy with his work because otherwise he wouldn't be coming on our show as a podcast guest. How you doing, Darshan?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Darshan, we wanted to explore a lot of things here, including your journey, how you started, investing in real estate, and then ultimately almost vertically integrating yourself with your own portfolio. That's something that I'm really fascinated about, and I wanted to share that with listeners. But before we get into that and some of the tactics and tools you use to get there, let's start with how you got your first spark or excitement in real estate and how that all turned out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I had gotten a job in Indianapolis, an engineering job, and I was looking for a place to rent. And, this was 2007. So, prices were kind of starting to tumble a little bit. And I had absolutely no idea what was going on in the market. But I thought, well, maybe I should consider buying a house, because at the time, the company that I was working for had like this temporary accommodation, that they had given me for 3 months. And I was of course paying for it, but nonetheless, it was kind of furnished accommodation that they had for their, as a part of their process of onboarding employees. So I was living there, and at the same time, I started looking for a place to buy or potentially rent, and then, eventually got connected with a realtor and really focused more on buying. So I bought a house. It was foreclosed at the time, and so it was a pretty good deal. It was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage. So once I bought it, I realized, well, I was single at the time, so I didn't necessarily need the whole house to myself. So I set up my bedroom in the master bedroom, and the other 2 rooms were basically available to be rented out. So I ended up renting those 2 rooms out to 2 of my friends at the time. And all 3 of us that lived in the house, we basically had a great time. We kind of lived together in that house, and the rent that they were paying was covering not only my mortgage, so principal and interest, but taxes and insurance, HOA, as well as the utilities, really. So I was living essentially rent-free for next 3 years. And I thought, well, if this is possible in this house, then maybe it's possible to do so in another house as an exclusive rental. So I bought one more house. Again, at the time, there were a lot more foreclosures available on the market. So I bought a house at the time in Indianapolis, and you're not going to believe these prices. It was a 4-bedroom, 3 full bath home that was built in 2005. I bought it in 2008 for $39,000.
Oh my God.
And I bought it at the time. My dad and I both kind of renovated the house. We did a little bit of work to it, fixed the water heater, and people used to do a number of crazy things. I think at that time, like when a house was foreclosed, they would go and cut off all the plumbing just so that squatters won't live in it and things like that. So we ended up renovating the house, kind of brought it back to life, and then lo and behold, obviously it was almost a new house. 4-bedroom, 3 full bath, 2-car garage. So it was rented for like $1,100 pretty much from day one.
Wow.
And it was bought for $39,000. So I was in my head, I'm like, well, at the time the down payment was, I think, 15% with the tax proration and all that. I think I took less than $4,000 to closing, and I'm like, well, this was all recovered in the first 6 months. So I'm like, this seems like a good thing to do. And then I did one more, and then I ended up taking a little bit of a hiatus to do some volunteering work and traveling and living life. But once I came back from that, I continued the real estate investment journey. But yeah, that's kind of how I got started in it.
Excellent. And why don't you tell people what you do today? I know that like today you've got a lot going on, so let's tell everyone what you've got going on today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I was working at Rolls-Royce most recently in my corporate career, and I left that in 2016 to do real estate full time. Eventually, I basically came to love what I do in real estate, and I do 4 things in real estate, maybe 5, but basically what I do is I continue to invest in real estate. So all residential, single family, but really primarily right now focused on multifamily, small, I would say mid-size and larger multifamily properties. I also run a property management company, as you kind of mentioned in the beginning of the show. Own and run a real estate brokerage, so I'm a managing broker for it, and I also have my loan origination license. So these are the 4 functional things I do. I invest, I run a property management company, I do brokerage, and do also loan origination. So this was all kind of set up over a period of time. Obviously, I left my job in 2016. So, this is kind of one step at a time type of a situation.
Mhm.
I've done a few flips. It's not my favorite thing to do. I just did it.
Mhm.
And then I just kind of got over it really quickly because mainly because of the tax implications and
Yeah.
kind of the grind that it really is to flip properties. But now, obviously I'm pretty settled in what I do and really focused on larger multifamily properties and syndicating those deals.
I would say that you also are doing an excellent job at property management. And
Thank
so
you.
I just hope that, all the listeners that are listening out there, they're looking for multifamily properties. They're not going to rush you all at the same time after listening to this podcast. But in any event, I thought it would be really cool to share you with the world because you've done an excellent job doing the property management on our properties. And we also have some together that we're co-owners on as well. But
yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. It's one of those things where property management is kind of a tough job in a way, but at the same time, with just continuous sort of diligence and
yeah,
staying on top of things, it does work.
100% it does. It's one of those things that, like you said on our podcast before, it's very forgiving. It's one of those things where, if you make a mistake in real estate, as long as you hold long enough, you can find a way to kind of correct out of it. Now, what I wanted to shift to here is I'm fascinated by this fact of you leaving in 2016 and you start to build up your own portfolio. And now all of a sudden you find yourself, well, why can't I manage these myself? Right? Why can't I do that? And obviously you can do that yourself. And I think up until very recently, all of the properties that you've managed was on your own, right? You owned them yourself, right? So can you talk a little bit about like that transition of going from buying single family homes and then having maybe a property manager support you to now taking over that integration? How did that shift happen and why did you do it?
So in my case, the journey was that when I was at Rolls-Royce, I was buying single family homes and then, buying really these small multifamily properties like 11 units and 20 units and so forth and so on. And I was self-managing at the time. And as I was getting ready to quit my job at Rolls-Royce, I thought, well, these units, just the self-management of it isn't going to keep me busy. So I got a broker's license. And a lot of friends approached and they said, well, we would like to be able to do the same thing that you did, which is to be able to quit the job based on passive income and so forth and so on. And so I said, well, sure. So I started helping people buy single family properties as real estate investments. And as soon as the first closing happened, the first question was, well, who's going to manage these properties? So then I said, well, I guess I am, because I'll start a property management company. So very organic in terms of how it kind of happened. I would say that up until I had about 90 units under management, it's always been, oddly enough, that about 50% of what I manage is have some ownership in. So even at the time, I think that we had about 90 units under management, and I think I own maybe some 50 or 60 of those. So at that time, the question was, what do we do? Kind of just stop growing or basically professionalize the systems that we have in place? So, obviously I decided to take the leap and professionalize the system. So we kind of hired an employee, we took on a property management system, implemented Appfolio, created really these systems that would allow us to scale. And then for almost about, I would say, a year and a half, kept growing very organically. 2018 was another milestone because that's when we implemented Appfolio, and then kind of grew organically until about 2020, which is when I was really focused. I was like, in order for us to have the scale that I really want, both in the property management as well as in the ownership, I really need to do something different. And that's when, obviously connected with people like you. And all of a sudden, I would say between late 2020 and end of 2021, we almost tripled our portfolio under management, as well as I would say doubled the assets under ownership. So I think it's been a great journey. It's been one of those things that you just look back and kind of almost look back at in awe that, how did this happen? But it has been very rewarding and very, I would say, to say the least, has been very adventurous.
Yeah, I would definitely go with you there on that point. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to bring myself back to the point where you are on this precipice where you're like, well, should we stop right now? We have 90 doors, right? Should we stop now, or should we make this a full-fledged business? The main question that I always come to myself, because, I've mentioned this before to you, that vertical integration may be something in my future, but, after thinking about it, I really think that leaving it to the professionals is the best thing to do. You must have had that thought in your mind too, right? Because at least the maxim from where I came from is that property management is all the hardest, the worst part of owning property. And here you are now trying to lean into it even more. So maybe can you speak to that, like what your thought process was in doing this?
Yeah, so I think mainly, and you're absolutely right. I always say that property management is the tip of the spear, right? That's where the money is made or lost. That's where the mistakes are often amplified, and something that you really have to live with if they're, they continue to happen, right? So I mean, it definitely is that that tip of the spear in terms of kind of overall operation of real estate assets. And I think you're absolutely right. So I went through the same questioning, right, in terms of what do we do? Is this something that we want to make it into a full-time career and a business, or do we hold off at the number of units we have and only self-manage the units we own? It's a lot easier to manage the stuff that you own versus manage for other people, right? Because when you're doing third-party management, there's a lot to be said about communicating, keeping people posted, making sure that the owners understand what the pluses and minuses of various different approaches are, right? So, and also from a property management standpoint, right, working with owners who are also professionals and also understanding and also want the same thing that you want. There's always a possibility in this kind of the 2022 world that we're in, that if you are not working with the right owners, you could potentially dig yourself in a hole or have an avalanche of lawsuits, right? I mean, those are all very real possibilities. So I think in the end, the main reason for coming to this conclusion of professionalizing the business and making it a real sort of an operating property management company is that it was in order to add scale, right? In order for us to be able to do the right thing, to respond to the maintenance requests on time, to have an office staff that could take on all the inquiries and do the leasing and be able to afford the systems that would make it easier to efficiently and profitably operate properties, right? I mean, see, you have a property, if it needs to be 100% occupied, right? And obviously within reason, you make that the best effort to keep it occupied that way. If you're below 95%, it should be a concern in everyone's mind, right? That the owner should be concerned, the property manager should be concerned, the leasing agent should be concerned. And I wanted to set things up in a way in which everyone was rewarded properly as well. So I think we're on our way. I would say that just like any business, I mean, this is one business that is totally open to continuous improvement. That was my sort of job function when I was in engineering roles. It was really continuous improvement. So this is one of those spaces where I really feel where continuous improvement is a big one. I think the technology, the way it's coming out, the adaptation of technology, not just by residents, but by contractors, by various service providers, by employees, right? So, and obviously, residents, it's great because, and let me end by saying this. So when I was at Rolls-Royce, I had a lot of friends who would say, well, if you had 10 properties, that would be too much. You would not know what to do with yourself. Like that would be too much work. And I remember thinking in my head that at that time I had 42 units. A lot of those friends didn't know necessarily that I was managing 42 units. But I think a lot of times when people say that, they don't realize the advancement of technology that has happened in this space. If you think about a realtor that was selling properties just 30 years ago, they had literally books of real estate. Like how pictures of houses, like folders of them, located in offices which were available to be sold, or people were printing ads in newspapers, which is just completely a different world from what it is today. I think to answer your question again, really came down to being able to have scale to do the right thing.
Yeah. And I think that's a fantastic answer because there's control there. And I love the technology answer. And that's one of the reasons why we're so happy with our partnership with you guys, is that you guys have really, really embraced the technology part of it. But in addition to that, when you start a business and, it's all fun and games when you're doing less than 100 units and it's all you, right? Let's talk about leverage of people. I think that's a big, big part of it too, because you have people, processes, and you've got the technology and then the product, which is the actual houses or the real estate that you're managing. It sounds like after you had 90 units or so, you decided to bring someone on to help you. How was that transition for you? Was that a difficult thing for you to be able, because here you are building this portfolio up and the main thing that you want is control, right? Because you're able to control and have more network, involved. You can do economies of scale. You can run things the way you want to run them. But now you're bringing on a team member who you have to train or bring in and tell them how you do things, right? And then you have this loss of control. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the mindset piece of what that enabled for you, right? Now that you bring on team members and what that's allowing you to do now.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, in any business, as well as in property management, probably more so in property management than many other businesses, that the personalities of the employees, the team that you bring together, and I suppose it's probably the same for every business, but how they work together among themselves, right? Your entire team, how they operate is probably more crucial. And in fact, this business is so open to being affected by personalities, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, you're literally just coordinating a lot of efforts, right? So you're coordinating with the tenants, you're coordinating with the contractors, you're coordinating with utility providers, you're coordinating with the service providers, you're coordinating with, trash collection companies. You're coordinating with sometimes, people from people who are providing you technology services like Appfolio, and people who are providing you with your ability to run background reports and things like that, right? So, and almost always, right? Like, I mean, I almost feel like we can write a book about basically war stories of doing property management, right? Because I mean, every day almost we have a situation where it's like, well, how did this happen, or how does this happen in America, or something like that, right? Where it's just mind-boggling. So the team, and I think in the beginning when you were asking the question, in my mind I was thinking that it's very unnerving, right, in a way, because now you
Mm-hmm.
have people who are representing you to tenants, to contractors, to service providers, to various different vendors, and you're selling something that's very intimate to people, right? You're selling housing. You're selling people their home. Yes, they're renting from you, but it's at the end of the day, that's their home, right? They have tenant rights. They have rights to their home. They have rights to privacy. They have rights to be notified if before gaining access to the property and so forth and so on. So it is definitely unnerving, right? You want to make sure that in this space you hire people who are generally respectful, who are very congenial is the word that comes to mind. I mean, people who are able to deal with situations and scenarios which are very much in your face, because I think it's a matter of time, because if you have the skill, right? If you're managing 500 units, you're always going to have something that's contentious,
Yep.
right? So you're going to have potentially contentious situation with tenants, with contractors, with other employees. So I think you want to build a team that is very, very genuinely compassionate, very genuinely focused on providing good places to live, good housing for people. I think there is sometimes, and obviously not that this is a concern in the industry, but I think when you think property management, right? When you think landlording, right? A lot of bad things come to mind, right?
You better
And I
believe
think
it.
the word, in fact, there are a lot of groups out there who are trying to get away from the word landlord, because it's a very bad word, in my opinion, as well.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of real estate investors association that really just don't like that word. And I think there's a good reason for it, right? So, the word really should be like a housing provider, right? And which is what we are. Right? We provide housing, right? At the end of the day, we ensure that, people get hot water, and people get heat, and people get air conditioning, and people's stoves are working, right? And every day there's something that breaks, and then you have to address it. So you almost have to have this mindset of a therapist, right? That when you're listening to people, it's always something wrong, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of wears you down unless you have this very, cheerful attitude, and the team that kind of keeps it cheerful, right? Because if the team gets very disappointed very quickly, or someone's on the team gets disappointed all the time, it's going to kind of bring down the attitude of the entire team. So that, these are the questions that I ask when we're interviewing, which is that, what are you like in the face of someone screaming at you? Although not that it happens all the time, but it can, right? And what you want the ability to get past that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It does. And I think this is great. This is like a crash course in property management, or at least trying to set expectations for what happens when you do property management. And I think that's awesome. And one of the things that I want to touch back on, and then we'll go for a full circle around this next question, is I know that you're also an investor, right? And having control of the property management side makes you a stronger investor. That's why it's so compelling, because you have full control of your operations, especially at scale. Because if you know what's happening on all of your properties at any time, you've got control of vendors. Like, you're always on the cutting edge, or the tip of the spear, like you like to say, on everything: the tenants, the vendors, even the owners, right? You're putting it all together. So how do you balance your investing business with your property management business? Because I want to help paint a picture for those out there who are maybe thinking about vertically integrating, and some perspective that you may be able to offer in that space of trying to do both roles at the same time.
Yeah, it's a good question, I think. So I always say that, there's 95% of the people in the world who could probably never do property management,
Yeah.
and 5% of the people in the world who wouldn't do anything else, right? It's just,
Mhm.
or
Mm.
there, I'm sure there are certain people in the world who either property management or something like it, right? Which is a very much a constant grind. I mean, you could have a phone call in the middle of the night, but you're okay with it. That's something that doesn't bother you. So that's one thing, right? That if you have the personality that can deal with that sort of anytime incoming, right? Then you're well suited for it. The other thing, which is, how do I balance my investing versus property management, right? So, obviously, like in all other businesses, right? You try to leverage the team around you, just like you do, right? In your business, and when you're looking for investment opportunities.
Mhm.
So I do the same thing, right? So we have a pretty good well built up team on the property management side. I would like to build a better team on the acquisition side, right? I would like to have an director of acquisition who kind of vets properties for us to buy. But right now, essentially, I am the director of acquisition for us, right? I'm my own director of acquisition.
Yep.
So, the really awesome thing about doing this is that you have much better access to properties and then owners and what's happening in the field. And no one has to tell you, well, the prices are going up for flooring or paint, or you're kind of aware of it on a day-to-day basis. I think one of the disadvantages of doing what I do is that you get pigeonholed into a geographical area because you're so much more in tune with that specific area. And you feel almost inherently uncomfortable going into a new area because you're like, well, I really don't know how this area is. And because you're used to knowing everything very intimately in a very different way, so nothing ever kind of compares to the level of knowledge you have about that particular geographical area. So I think, obviously there's always ways around it, right? You can always break that mold or break out of that mold and kind of get out of that whole analysis paralysis situation about a new area. But you generally tend to get pigeonholed into one area, geographical area, if you're doing both property management and purchasing assets at this level. Obviously there are companies and there are hedge funds and there are private equity companies that do this all over the world, and they're fine because I think the people who are making decisions are not like we are, in a sense that, we're intimately familiar with the Indianapolis area, and that's where I started, and I bought a house and rehabbed it and flipped a few properties here and there, and know a bunch of contractors, and I can call somebody, and I'll be like, if I go buy property in Florida and something happens in the middle of the night, who do I call, right? Because I have no network of people. Whereas here, that network of people and friendships and relationships have been built over 15 plus years. And I think I can call on those relationships. I think that's I would say a little bit of a downside, that you have this sense of fear that I don't know that many people in that area.
That's a really good point. I never thought of it that way. Do you think that, and this is just a side question before I go back to what I really want to ask you, but do you think that if you did try to venture out into another market, that your lack of visibility would be uncomfortable for you? Is that what that is? Is that what you're trying to say? Is that it's just,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Because you're used to being able to see, okay, well, what is the actual unit price per square foot of flooring installed, right, for LVP? And you know that right off the top of your head because you know what the labor rates are in Indy, right? But if you're out in like California, or if you're out in Las Vegas or something, materials, but maybe not the rental rate or the labor rates. And so you're going to struggle there. And in addition to that, the market dynamics too, and the politics and the laws, right? All that stuff is completely different. And the culture, right? Like people in Florida are probably a little bit different than people in Montana, right? That's my thought.
yeah, that's fair enough. I guess I don't know either. So, but yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. So, I think that's right. That this point of discomfort is really more to do with a lack of understanding about an area and also lack of network. But I think one way to overcome, and we're kind of almost in the process of being able to overcome that scenario. So one way to overcome that is just leverage people who have been in that area long enough, right? So, I mean, the ultimate thing is to bake in costs accordingly. Like in Indianapolis, we can get things done cheaper than we can maybe somewhere else, right? And so you have to bake in costs which are higher than what we might do in an area that we're extremely familiar in, because that's just the reality, right? That if you don't know as many people, if you don't have those relationships, things probably will cost. If you just Google things and call people who show up, people have paid a ton of money to make sure their listing comes up at the top of the page, right? So
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So I want to move on here and just ask you a quick question about these two, because I'm just fascinated by the concept of running two businesses at the same time, right? And in addition to that, you have kids and a wife at home as well. So that's
Yeah.
another thing that we could also get into if we have the time. But basically, I want to explore, like, you have your property management business, which is now levered and pretty much running. You have to come by and you still have to like operate it, and you still have to fill in when people are sick, and you're still in the business there, right? But to a certain extent. Then you have this acquisitions business. So are there any lessons that you're taking from either one of these that you're putting into the other? Like any of the things that you're learning from your property management business that you can put into your investing, and vice versa?
Yeah, it's a fantastic point. So, property management is really a contact sport. It's a very much a day-to-day affair. I mean, I go to the office more or less every day,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm very familiar with what's going on. I'm very intimately involved. And, so is real estate investing, right? When you're investing in real estate, you want to know certain things. You want to be able to say, well, this property has a boiler. So who do I call to get a better understanding of a boiler? Then you'll know somebody because you've been in the business, right? So you can call people, you can rely on that network of contacts. It really helps in all sides of the equation, I think. So right now there's an interesting case in point. So I'm trying to sell a condo, which I bought all the way back in 2008. And see, at the time I had no idea about aluminum wiring. But when the buyer, they're offering a great price, but when they did an inspection, they found there's aluminum wiring. It didn't take me a whole lot of time to figure out that, hey, I can call this guy, and then they came and walked it in one day,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas right now, if you could have potentially taken somebody else like a week to get somebody on the site
Yep.
to get a quote, right? So I think that kind of back and forth happens. The other thing is, I think just when you're evaluating properties, I think you get much better at it, just because on an ongoing basis, this is what you do, right? You manage it every day. So you should know, right? Looking at a roof that this kind of needs attention, or these gutters need attention, or the exterior needs attention, or the tenants are not keeping the property up, or is it going to cost 10,000 to get it back up and running, or is it going to cost 250,000? So I think you have kind of those ballpark estimates in your head, which really helps, because just being in the business, this is a challenge for everybody in any kind of business. But one thing that you kind of learn to do is protect your time, right? So you say, look, I leave at 9 o'clock, but I come home at 6 o'clock, right? Even though there may be like networking events happening like every day, but you pick and choose the ones that you go to, right? Because if I was single and didn't have kids and whatnot, then I would say, yeah, I will, go to pretty much every networking event. And I think people who are very passionate about it, and if they don't have those other responsibilities, they can. But I think at the same time, if you do, and if you're trying to maximize life in a sense, then you have to put boundaries around your time, I think. And I've heard a lot of other people suggest the same thing. And it's really, it's one thing that works really well.
Let's talk about this a little bit. I know that this show right now, or at least this season of our show, is focused on knowledge equity and helping other people understand what it is that you do, and really diving deep into how you do these things. And I think we've explored a lot of that, right? At least as far as we can with the time that we have. But I also want to talk about balance. Your wife and your newborn, right? Which is
we have a daughter. Yeah,
that's right. Congrats. That's right. I remember meeting her, and she's awesome. You guys are trying to also live a life, right? A life while you're doing all this. And so can you talk a little bit about, like, while you're getting your property management business up to speed, and then you're also getting these properties going, you have these two businesses side by side, and what happens on those hard days? What happens when things are really tough, either, both on the investment side, where either a deal falls through, or you discover something in due diligence that makes it completely different deal, and you have a really tough day, like an emergency or a fire or a flood event or something like that happening at one of your properties. How do you guys handle that? Like, how do you guys like put that down and move on with your life?
I think I would say two things. One is, obviously, family really helps in that, right? In a sense that when you come home, obviously you can rely on people at home to kind of cheer you up and bring that mood back to a good place, so to speak. The other thing, which I think I have found really helpful, is to work with reasonable people. And when I say reasonable, I mean work with people who are reasonable as coworkers, as colleagues, as employees, as investors, as owners. So, a lot of property management companies, when they're starting out, they're very, as they should be, right? That they're very open to just about any business. I think it's very critical to pick and choose your partners very, very carefully, especially in this business, because, obviously, if people are understanding of that, of those boundaries, of those, life situations and I think I find that more than any other business, people are very, very understanding in the business of real estate, right? So, I've made tons of friends who I met through real estate. And then I have friends that I met outside of real estate, but we've ended up doing things together in real estate, and we've just become closer. And people end up caring for one another better, I think. But I think like I said, at the end of the day, it's very critical to build a team and also work with people and individuals. They're able to recognize those situations, and they're able to kind of work with you and understand your life. And just as well as, you have to do the same thing for them as well, right? And if they're having a tough day or a tough situation, then you have to jump,
Step in.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just the way it works. And I think real estate is very, very amenable to that. I've met a lot of people who are very helpful. And sometimes I'll give you one kind of a funny example. Sometimes you're competitors, right? Like let's say there's multiple property management companies in Indianapolis. You compete on certain things, but then if it's a tough situation, then really people help each other out. It's kind of almost odd if you think about it, but I think that's what makes real estate something very unique and very great.
Yeah.
I've talked to people who are in the capital markets, and they always get the feeling that, if you're in investment banking, it's always like you have to always cover your back and make sure that, you don't share some information. And there's the level of friendships are very different. But I think in real estate, even sometimes people that you're otherwise competing with in a different space will step up and help you out if they think that you're having a tough time. So I think that's the key.
Excellent. Such a good answer. And it makes sense to me now that like you have good people to rely on, either both on the partnership side and also on your team and the property management side, right? At least when you have something going where you've got the scale where the likelihood of that type of thing escalates, right? When you do have that happening. So thank you for sharing that. That's good.
Even your clients, right? Sometimes it's tough to let go of business, but I think you almost have to, right? In order to select the type of people that you work with.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. Couldn't agree with you there more. And exactly the same thing on the capital side, right? Like when you're working with investors that you're going to be partnering with these individuals. And it's the same thing with property management, right? Like you as a property manager, you have the right to fire clients just as much as we have the right to fire property managers.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And on the capital raise side, it's kind of the same thing, right? So my, one of my friend, he always says this, that you want the people who are going to ask you a lot of questions up front and not bother you later on, right? So you want people who are tough in the beginning, right? But then they understand business is business, right? So you want them to kind of evaluate you, your background, the deal, the situation, almost to the nth degree. Say, yeah, okay, well, now I've done my homework and I trust your abilities and capabilities and your ethics and all of that. And then I'm willing to work with you.
That's great advice. Love it. Love it. So let's shift here real quick. And this will be the last couple of questions that we ask, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up the show. But awesome. I would say would you recommend your path to everyone out there? Or would you say that maybe there's certain elements that would fit individuals better? Or is this something that you absolutely believe in, that like most people, if they want to do it the right way, this is the way they should be doing it?
So I think I'm still trying to figure out my path. So I think that for what it's worth, I think I have these situations maybe every 2 years or so where I'm like, is this really what I want to be doing? So I think I go through those motions, and I think for what it's worth, I think it's important to go through those motions than anything else, right? Because those are the ones that will give you the idea, clarified idea. And I think that idea is going to become clarified as time goes on, right? So I've heard this statement where that life is a progressive unfoldment of reality, which is essentially what it is. And you have, as the individual living it, right, to define that reality, right? So I think I would say that real estate investments is definitely something that everyone should consider, at least a little bit, right? I really mean everyone, right? Everyone should consider it because, since time immemorial, right, home ownership, land ownership has always been part of human endeavor and human life. And it's one thing that has a potential and clearly shown by, historical numbers, right, that it's long-term wealth building, not just for you, but your future generations and so forth and so on. So I think I would definitely suggest that everyone should consider investing in real estate. I don't know that I would say that everyone should consider vertically integrating property management, brokerage, loan origination, and investing, right? So I think that's something that if you're really gung-ho and if you're really into it and if you really end up enjoying it, right? So I didn't jump into it as I was leaving Rolls-Royce. I took 6 months off to almost do nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, later on, I took almost a year and a half to live in a different city outside of Indianapolis. I lived in Washington, D.C. for about a year and a half. And I was commuting back and forth, but I was spending, kind of the lion's share of my time in Washington, D.C. So I think that's anymore, really, you don't want to wait until you're in your 60s to do that, right? So that's the whole thing. I think real estate is a great thing to consider, and if it's something for you, you should do it. But at the same time, all these other service related efforts that go around the real estate industry, I think those are something that you should be more careful about.
Thank you for that. I have one last question before we head into the final segment of the show, because it's just been on my mind the whole time, is for those people who are interested in doing what you want to do or doing what you did, right? Which was, starting to build a property management company alongside your rentals and doing that. Do you have any tips for those folks based on like what you learned from early on, like when you're doing your single families and then maybe your first multifamily property?
Yeah. So I would say one major advice, right, is buy systems early on, right? So I think I implemented Appfolio when we had 90 units, 89 to be exact, right, under management. And until that time, I was running everything through spreadsheets. And, I'll give you this funny example of so I was just dispersing rental income to owners, right? At the time, I think Zelle was owned by Chase. So it used to be called Chase Quick Pay, right? And they had a limit of only, you being able to disperse $5,000. So I was dispersing rent over like a 6-day period, right? Because I'd run out of the limit and then I have to disperse the rest the following day. So don't do stuff like that, right? So get the proper systems. Those systems will do two things, right? If it'll help you grow, if that's what you want to do. And if you don't want to grow, which is just perfectly fine, then it'll help you do it right and do it with the minimal amount of headache, right? And minimal amount of sort of redoing efforts. So I think I come from a little bit of a manufacturing background, and the worst thing that you want to do is rework, right? In manufacturing, to kind of take a product and rework it. So I think implementing the right systems and tools really help you reduce the rework, so to speak. So that's one advice. So get those systems early on.
I love it.
Worth every penny.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can totally vouch for that. And I'm glad to see that it also translates into the property management side as well, because I've been doing that in my real estate investing side, which after this recording is over, I want to show you what I'm working on as well. So you can see what I'm looking at.
Yeah, but you're the master of it.
We'll see. We'll take a look. But anyway, Darshan, thank you so much for coming on the show. But we are going to do one last section, which is 5 questions that we ask every one of our guests. And so we're going to rapidly ask them to you. And they're meant to be about 30-second response or smaller, if possible. If not, it's okay. We'll give you a write-off to be able to answer however long you'd like to. Okay?
Sure. Well, I'm all about time, so I'll keep my time.
All right. Sounds good. Time protection. I love it. All right. Let's head into the rapid round. Number 1, what book has had the biggest impact on you and why? That's outside The Rich Dad or the Bible. Because we get those all the time.
Sure. So no sort of religious books. Yeah, I can understand that. I read Never Eat Alone. It's been a while, but that was a very good book, and kind of helped me understand a little bit more about making sure that meeting people and sort of spending time with the right people. It means a lot. In Sanskrit, actually, there's a very good word called satsang, which means to spend time with good people. So and how much value that adds to your life. And the book Never Eat Alone really emphasizes that. Obviously, it emphasizes from a business perspective, but I think it's applicable in business as well as other life scenarios.
Of course. Yeah. And I remember that book was written by Lyle Lowndes or something like that a long time ago.
It's got that orange cover,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was one of the first books that I read on personal development, and it scared me, the things that it said, because I had to break out of my shell to go sit with people. And it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, all right, cool. Number 2, if people wanted to emulate your success, what is the first actionable thing that they could do to follow in your footsteps?
Get rid of analysis paralysis. Just do the deals, right?
Love it.
I think a lot of people out there do a lot of research, and as they should. The research is always definitely very good, but focus on doing the deals, doing the work.
Awesome.
I think that's
execution. Incredible advice. Yep, absolutely. Number 3, what is one tool, process, or hack in the last 3 months that helped you save time and or effort?
Wow, this is interesting. In the last 3 months, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Calendly. So I'm a little bit of a late starter to that. I know a lot of people have been using that, but it's a great tool to be able to schedule meetings like this, right? So I mean, just kind of send someone a link, and it helps you coordinate meetings pretty easily and keeps your calendar full, and then just be able to spend time with your family afterwards, right? So I think that way you're not juggling calls potentially after hours and things like that. So
Yep. I'm a huge fan, and we can geek out about this later on because I have the processes behind it, but we'll talk about that later.
Yes.
Number 4, if the people you know had to describe you with one word, what do you think that would be?
Pleasant.
I would agree. I would agree with you. That's really good.
Hopefully, anyways.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll let the listeners judge you on that. So listeners, you can go ahead and comment and rate and review. Let us know what you think. All right. Last question I have right here is, what small thing do most people not know about you?
I don't know. That's a tough one. I guess most people in my personal life do know about this, like friends and family and people that I've worked very closely with in the nonprofit world. But I think a lot of times in the business world, people don't know that I've traveled quite a bit, and I've taken 3 years off from professional career to basically just travel and volunteer for different community organizations and do service and those types of things. And which is, I think, one of the things that I originally did real estate. I started investing in real estate for. I've deviated from that path a little bit by focusing a little bit more energy and attention in real estate. But I think in due course of time, I will refocus my time and attention more on those efforts and endeavors. I don't know if it's very small, maybe it's very big.
Yeah.
So, but that's one thing I think a lot of people in the business world may not know about me.
Excellent, man. That's great. I love it. And that's a perfect way to wrap up the show. So Darshan, thank you so much for coming on and being genuine and open, and really appreciate you for all you do, and especially for all of our properties together as well.
Thank you.
But in any event, what I'd like to do is, before we end the show, why don't you tell the listeners who want to find out more about what you and you guys do, both on the investment and on the property management side, how they can get a hold of you, or if you want to have them get a hold of you, just let us know. It's an open floor for you right now.
Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah. So I, just like you, I recently started into this whole world of podcasting and sharing my story a little bit. It's been interesting. It's been a little bit of a kind of a breaking out of the comfort zone. So yeah, that's going pretty well, I would say. And you can find me at realestatedarshan.com. That's realestatedarshan, DARSHAN.com. And also you can subscribe to my podcast, and the name of the podcast is Real Estate Darshan as well. So it's both on Apple as well as Spotify.
Yeah, and it's also your Instagram handle, if I remember
yeah,
right.
Of course. Yes. My
So there you
Instagram
go.
handle is Real Estate Darshan. Correct.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Darshan, thank you so much for coming on the show. And for all of you listeners who have listened all the way to the end, I want to thank you as well. And please, wherever you're listening or watching this, please like, subscribe, comment, engage with us, because we want to deliver excellent content like Darshan has here today for us all. So please do that for us. We really appreciate that. We want to appease those algorithm gods so that we can find our way up the chain and get exposure to more people and get more great guests on to help serve you. So Darshan, thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you everyone for listening, and have an awesome day. Take care, everyone.